Coming up on Chasing the Natty, we are concluding our CFF 2025 Crash Course series, and we are going to be talking about everyone's three favorite positions in fantasy: the tight ends, the kickers, and the defenses. We'll be going through the top 24 tight ends in our consensus rankings over at campusdecanton.com. We'll discuss a few guys who we think are going too high and too low in drafts. Then we'll be taking a look at my top 12 kickers and defenses for this upcoming season. All of that and more coming right after this.
Sellers picks his way to the right and is tripped up, reaching for the end zone. Touchdown. What a start.
Give it to Reed, and there he goes. Nobody's going to catch him. It's touchdown.
It's caught. Jeremiah Smith. Touchdown, Ohio State. The legend grows.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. Hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning during the off season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we do here, head on over to campusdecanton.com. Subscribe there with any of our phenomenal tiers. We have content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether it's CFF, Devy, C2C, College IDP, College DFS, Underdog Best Ball. Really, if you play it, then we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. In fact, right now, if you want to support the show even further, make sure when you sign up for one of our yearly memberships, you use that promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y, to get 10% off your yearly membership. If you can't do something like that, totally fine. You can just show us some love by leaving a like, a comment, and a subscription on the YouTube side of things. And then on the podcast side of things, make sure you leave a 5-star review. Make sure you are following the show. Not only does that show us support, but also the game of college fantasy football in general, a ton of support. If you have any further questions or want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me and the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty, and the handsome fellow joining me today, totally of his own volition and not because I threatened balling with my bestie's $20 weekly budget, is Mr. Chris K. Chris, welcome to the show, man. You excited to talk tight ends, kickers, and defenses?
Not at all. No, not at all. I'm just going to put it out there. Zero excitement. But I will say, Jared, I have an idea. What if you're going to sign up for a yearly membership at C2C at Campus Canton, use the code of which you think which one of us did better. So use Natty if you think Jared won today's kind of like around the horn, got the most points today, or use Bestie, BESTIE, if you thought I did a better job.
I am totally down for that, and I'm excited to see me win next week. That'd be great.
You're going to get this. I'm not worried about it. You're way more prepared than I am, but sometimes vibes wins out. We'll see.
Vibes can win out sometimes. And honestly, when it comes to tight ends, kickers, and defenses, if there is a show to go based on vibes, sometimes it is this one right here, because that'll just lead directly into our open conversation about these positions here, okay? We're talking tight ends, we're talking kickers, we're talking defenses. There's a reason why I am squishing all three of these into one show. These are the three most volatile positions in fantasy, to the point where a lot of leagues don't even include kickers and defenses anymore because it feels so random rather than kind of playing to skill. But we'll talk about that a little bit today. We'll talk about some things that you can do to try to have an edge on those positions, and we'll definitely be focusing most of our time towards the tight ends, as most people still include tight ends in their leagues, although I do see a growing movement for people to remove tight ends and just combine them with wide receivers, which I think, I don't know, they're two different positions on the field. I don't see a real reason to combine them. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we're getting good enough tight ends yearly now where it makes sense to have a tight end position. You know, like if we just had no real options, like I think there's at least 10 to 12 really interesting options in some regard here today we can talk about. And then even more on top of that, if you wanted to kind of stretch it in some areas. So like you can't play fantasy football without a tight end position. That just feels like not fully fantasy football.
To me, again, it's weird when we combine positions together like that, right? Like, I understand, like, we have multiple types of running backs and stuff like that, but the tight end is very much its own position of a combination of offensive linemen and a wide receiver for your team. very distinct role rather than like I'm not gonna change the difference between like a receiving back for like versus like a power back or something like that. It doesn't make any sense. Let's talk tight ends for this year, okay? Going into this year, it really did kind of feel like this is the weakest group we've kind of had in a while, and just like running backs and wide receivers, a lot of it has to do with us not really having any clear top tier of tight ends for drafts this year, at least with guys who were excellent last year and are back to perform that excellence again this year. 8 out of the top 12 went off to the NFL. The 4 that did return in the top 12 from last year all transferred, right? Tanner Koziel now at Houston, Max Clare at Ohio State, Terrence Carter at Texas Tech, and Dorian Fleming over at Maryland. We'll talk about a couple of those guys here, but it's really the second tier of tight ends that kind of get most of the attention right now. Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt, tight end 14 last year. Matthew Lauder, Boise State. Justin Jolie, NC State. Joe Royer, Cincinnati. Blake Bosma, Western Michigan. Jack Endries from Cal. All top 24 tight ends who returned from last year, but very much all in that kind of second tier of tight ends last year. So I think what a lot of people are kind of looking for is, of those guys, who can take that next step, who can kind of reach, I'm not going to say the Harold Fant and Tyler Warrens of the world, but, hit the Tanner Koziel or Rondé Gadsden, go from 100 fantasy points to 150 fantasy points. Is that kind of what you're looking for with tight ends this year, Kay? Or are you playing it safe?
I have been shooting for the moon here a little bit with especially with underdog basketball drafts. I have a lot of Sadiq. I'm starting to warm up to Stowers. I think we saw what happened last year with Tyler Warren in Penn State, and it's really impacting how everybody views, at least in bigger formats, how you view the position. It's no longer I just don't even care. Let me punt it and let me just load up on another position instead. I think people are actually trying to be more strategic with what guys can actually be close to the cheat code or be the cheat code, like Tyler Warren was, or close to it, right? Because you get such an advantage if you do nail that. And so I think that's why people are attacking it a little bit differently, maybe an underdog versus on Fantrax when you're trying to beat 11 other people. You don't necessarily need the cheat code, right? You can do things differently and still be fine, especially if it's a redraft where you get position week by week changes. So I'm shooting forward a little bit. I'm totally open to the idea of a guy being a bust, but also at the same idea of, this guy could score 8 or 10 times. So that's how I'm viewing it this year.
That is something I really wanted to kind of dive into this year, and I couldn't really find a good resource on it, was kind of looking into some of these offenses that do tend to target their tight ends around the red zone more often than others, right? We can look at targets all day long, but that touchdown rate for tight ends can prove to be so huge. Some of the guys we'll talk about today that I'm expecting to bounce back a little bit this year, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they only scored 1 or 2 touchdowns last year, right? But they had the production there, so that tells me, okay, their usage is there. We just need more of those yards to come in the red zone. And sometimes that does balance out year to year. Sometimes it doesn't. That's just the way those offensive coordinators work there. I've never been one to really punt the tight end position. I usually try to identify, here's my top tier of guys. And especially learning my lesson a couple years ago with my huge Michael Train hype train that I was absolutely the conductor on. I've kind of learned to not really shoot for the first usually 2 or 3 tight ends that come off the board. And I try to grab the back end of the top tier in my mind. So this year, if I'm looking at my top tier of tight ends, which is honestly maybe a great segue over to our top 12 tight ends, but looking at my tight ends here, and my Google Chrome's crashing. This is great. Anyway, my top tier tight ends, Sadiq, Stowers, Royer, those are typically your first 3 guys that are coming off the board. And I've grabbed a ton of the guys on the back end of that. So Lauder, Jolie, Reynolds, Endries, a ton of John Michael Gillenborg, right? That's typically what I try to aim for and grab one of those guys. And then, any tight ends after that, wait super late. No real reason to reach up for your second, third, even fourth tight end if that's the way you want to do it.
The nice thing is there are a lot of options. There's actually a lot of guys in the top 10 or 12 that you can really feel pretty good about. I think you can look at some of them and say, okay, well, this might be a little bit of a unique scenario where I'm not necessarily buying it. But I'm not on Gillenborg from Wyoming, but I know you are and some others are as well. There's a lot of different flavors here for the picking.
No, for sure. All right, let's gonna fix that real quick. My Google Chrome shut down on me, so I gotta reset some things real quick, but that is totally fine. We're still recording. All right, we're back. We're ready to go. So yeah, let's segue on over to our top 12 tight ends for this year. And it all starts at the top here with Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end out of Oregon. At number 2, we have Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt. At number 3, we got Joe Royer out of Cincinnati. Number 4, we have Justin Jolie out of NC State. At number 5, we have Jack Endries, formerly the tight end out of California, now headed over to Texas. Number 6, Matt Lauder out of Boise State. Number 7, John Michael Gillenborg out of Wyoming. At number 8, we got Trey'Dez Green out of LSU. At number 9, Daquan Wright out of Ole Miss. At number 10, we have Luke Reynolds out of Penn State. Number 11, we got Blake Bosma out of Western Michigan. And number 12, we have Jack Velling out of Michigan State. So, okay, normally on these episodes, I let the guests go first with their first 2 that they want to discuss in this range. But since one of the guys that I want to discuss here is our number 1 guy overall for tight end, I figured it only makes sense really to start with him. We'll talk about Kenyon Sadiq here. He's one of the guys I want to discuss. I want to talk about my boy John Michael Gillenborg, but we'll get to him here in a second. These Crash Course series are meant to help people that are just coming around to CFF, right before the season starts and everything. So for those of you who have listened to CTN quite a bit this offseason, I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record here. But I do think it's once again worth bringing up this discussion surrounding Kenyon Sadiq, right? Because, we were just discussing all those names I just mentioned, Stowers, Lauder, Jolie, Royer, Bosma, Endries, all these guys have finished in the top 24. None of those guys are named Kenyon Sadiq, but yet here Kenyon Sadiq is as our top tight end for CFF this year, right? And I am not a fan of the level of the Sadiq hype has gotten to, but I also need to be clear that I don't think he's a bad pick in a vacuum, right? I have him as tight end 4. Will Stein and Oregon have been doing great at tight end the last couple of years. Oregon does not have a lot of receiving options this year. He can create yards at the catch. His ADOT was kind of a little low, but according to the staff, they're going to try to target him downfield a little bit more. All of that combines for a really nice projection to where I have him at tight end 4. But what I don't get is still this level to which Sadiq is kind of being elevated above the rest of the field over guys like Stowers, Lauder, Jolie, all these guys who we've already kind of seen him do it, right? Sadiq now consistently goes in the early 6th round, sometimes even earlier. I've seen him as high as the 4th round in a couple of drafts. Meanwhile, guys like Stowers, Royer, Jolie, Lauder, all those guys, I'm going to say those 4 names 100 times here, but these are guys we've already seen put together good seasons at tight ends, and they're going as far as 1 round later in Stowers' case and up to 4 rounds later in Lauder's case. There are a couple of things I wonder about here with Sadiq, because again, I get the projection. He's extremely, extremely talented, very athletic guy, but his ADOT last year was really low, 2.4 yards downfield. And like I said, I know the staff has said that they're going to hit him downfield more. And we saw that in the spring game a little bit, but it is extremely rare to see a guy's usage change that drastically. And so that makes me worry a little bit there. I also wonder what happens to Sadiq's ability to kind of create yards after the catch when he's one of maybe 2 options that defenses have to defend in that passing game, rather than him being the 4th or 5th option last year. He can kind of be that surprise X factor that defenses weren't really considering. But at the end of the day, like you said, Kay, people are looking for the next Tyler Warren. They're looking for that next guy that can really hit that 200 fantasy point potential here. I just think that the thing we have to grapple with here is that there may not be a Tyler Warren in this class. In fact, I have 0 tight ends projected to break 135 fantasy points, let alone 200 fantasy points. Kay, I know you're a big fan of Sadiq, so help me kind of understand this desire to elevate him above the rest of the field here.
Yeah, well, I think first off, the ADOT stuff is, I don't think you can really reference it with you have to take it with a grain of salt. When you're the 2nd or 3rd option at the tight end position Terrence Ferguson was picked in the 3rd or 4th round.
Yep.
At that point, they're just using pieces the way they use them, right? Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden, all these different guys are being used in specific ways in a smart offensive system. Sadiq just was not that player that was there, right? I mean, Ferguson it's not like he was a backup to somebody that wasn't drafted, right? That would be a little bit worrisome.
True.
And Terrence Ferguson's ADOT was like almost 8. It wasn't like some unworldly number where he can't get to. So if they want to use him more like Ferguson, it's not that far of a reach to get there. I think if you're taking him that high, you really truly believe that they're going to use him on the ground and in the passing game a significant bit. You know, I feel like it might be a little bit of a stretch, and that's why, like in a regular Fantrax league, 6th round does feel a little bit pricey. If you're going for the advantage and praying that you're right, but he definitely has the biggest bust potential. And ultimately, we know what we're going to get with these other guys, which is a very good season. But how much of an advantage over some of these other guys are you really getting if you take like Royer or Stowers? It's not the same type of advantage that you could get with Sadiq. Like if Stowers was in Oregon's offense, I mean, he would be the number 1 tight end, like clear by a mile. But the problem is Vandy runs slow. He's going to get heavy usage, but they're not going to score a ton, and the offense is going to limit him. Well, Oregon's not going to do that to Sadiq if they use him like a Stowers or close to it. I wonder what would happen if Tez Johnson was still around, right? And it was clear that Sadiq was not the clear potential top 1 or 2 offensive target. When we saw in the spring game, he had a great spring game. So there's buzz, there's a little bit of performance, there's an athleticism to him. Like if you look at the star rating on C2C, like it's an incredible number. It's up there. There's a lot of reasons that point to it. That being said, like it is a price that is very high. So you're hoping that you're right. Maybe have a backup plan in the later rounds to make up for any potential bust.
Maybe I'm just too burned by my Michael Trigg love a couple of years ago, because to me this feels very, very similar, including the great spring game and everything, right? Where I'm like, all the stars are aligning just like they were aligning for Sadiq, and then just doesn't come to fruition.
There are some odd similarities, right? Because Ole Miss has had some good tight ends, and he just wasn't this the Ole Miss year? He came in and had the big spring game. I don't know.
Two huge spring games in a row, by the way, I might add.
Yeah, Ethan and I were on Sadiq, not like first or anything, but like we were on him before the spring game. So like we liked the upside and the potential before then. Ethan is the leader of the Royer pack in terms of like who he's drafting this year. But
I'm joining him with that. I have so much Royer this year.
So it is eerily similar. They both have like incredible offensive systems at the time and now, right? So like there is some caution that you should have, but I don't know. Like there's not one guy here that could go 60 catches and 30 rushing attempts with like 10 or 12 touchdown potential.
I don't know if I could even project that out for Kenyon Sadiq in terms of the rushing usage being 30 rushes. I mean, they got
2 or 3 a game is not that crazy though. He had 5 as a limited participant,
I know, but like
2 or 3 a game is not crazy.
Why would you risk one of your best receiving options when you have a loaded backfield, right? When you got, you got the trickery. You got the trickery that Will Stein and the offense wants to play. They do have some big games that they have to like come out and perform for. It's not like their schedule is super soft. All right, well, we'll see. We'll talk about my number 1 tight end here, which is definitely outside the consensus for most people here. And I have John Michael Gillenborg as my tight end 1. I mean, okay, you have him what, tight end 12,
like
13?
7 maybe? 11.
I was towards the back end at 12. So I fully admit that I am outside the consensus on this. I've drafted a ton of Michael Gillenborg this year. He's my golden goose this year. My tight end 1. I'll tell you why. He missed 3 games last year and still managed to finish in the top 36 in tight ends. He was on pace for a top 20 finish if he had those 3 games. So already we have another guy here, really solid for. We know exactly what we're getting out of him. Of all the tight ends in my projections, his yards per catch over the last 2 years is only beaten by Elijah Lofton. So he's getting very high value targets. He creates a lot of yards after the catch. You don't really see that very often with tight ends. In the spring, Jay Salvo said he wants to get Gillenborg 10 plus opportunities a game. Now, I doubt that actually happens, because then we'd be talking about a 100 plus target season, and I just don't really see that. But what I do expect is somewhere around 75 targets. So that would be about 6 to 7 targets a game, considering that he is the veteran receiving option, the number 1 option for this offense in the passing game. I can absolutely see him getting that opportunity, 6, 7 targets per game. Last season, he was on pace for 63 targets. I don't think it's, given how the staff's been talking about his importance, I don't think a bump from 63 to 75 is super unreasonable. But like a lot of these tight ends that kind of fall into the range that he is in, a lot of them are part of offenses that you kind of question their ability to score. But this is also year 2 of this coaching staff. I think they'll perform better this year. And I think Gillenborg, you want to talk about guys that have the potential to not take the top off the defenses, but take the top off in terms of what their potential is. I think Gillenborg is one of those guys.
I have a hard time just because I think the offense could be so bad. Like, I mean, this is a bottom 20 offense last year, and I don't know, like, where is it getting better? I don't know who's the quarterback.
Gaden Anderson.
Is that a good thing?
I would say so. It's better than Saboba because like Saboba couldn't pass a ball to save his life. Anderson's the more consistent passer out of the two. And also you have Sargent apparently up and coming, so that'll be a additional receiving option to where defenses can't key in on Gillenborg there. The run game is where it starts and ends, though, because if they don't get that running game figured out this year, it's going to be another rough year for this Wyoming offense. They got to be able to stay out there on the field. They got to keep drives consistent. Otherwise, Gillenborg's going to still be capped at that 3 touchdown upside. In which case, yeah, that completely throws everything away from me.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? Is like how good are they going to be offensively if he's only right? You kind of alluded to it, Sadiq. Like, what if he's the only option on Wyoming that's any good?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the defense going to do, right? The touchdowns ultimately, when it comes to the tight end position, like you have to score touchdowns, like because the volume is never going to be there to make up for a lack of scoring. So, he has. I think you have to have him top 10-ish. I just moved him to 10 to make you feel better, just as a heads up, Jared.
Aw, thanks,
to be top 10, like he has the volume and he's getting passes thrown to him a little bit further down the field, good yards per target. It's like almost 10. Like those really positives, but if he cannot score 4, 5, 6 touchdowns, he has, especially with this group of tight ends, like he has no shot of finishing top 10.
I've got him projected for 6 touchdowns this year. Do we think that if Wyoming scores, or do we think if Wyoming can get 18 passing touchdowns this year, do we think it's possible that Gillenborg scores 1 out of every 3 of those? I think there's a decent chance.
I mean, possible, but like, what about? I mean, he only had 3 on 47 targets. So what is that? 1 every.
He also had a QB carousel going a good chunk of the year. I'm hopeful that Caden Anderson, being the clear full-time starter now, will kind of provide some more consistency for that offense because Savoba transitioned to tight end.
He's an athletic talent, and he's going to get volume. You just got to buy into the touchdowns. I'm curious the last time they threw for 18 touchdowns. Okay, 2 years ago, Peasley did it. I was going to say, but only 2,000 passing yards. So you got to have better quarterback play. If you're in on Caden Anderson, that's fine. You can get to 5, 6 touchdowns, and he'll be definitely warrant the top 10 final.
All right, let's move on to your 2 guys you want to discuss in this range. Kay, you wanted to touch on Daquan Wright out of Ole Miss and Jack Velling out of Michigan State. Let's start with Wright, who's kind of had a bit of an up and down roller coaster of a news cycle last couple of weeks here. So where are we at with Wright?
Yeah, I noted this before. So Luke Haas got hurt for Ole Miss, the other tight end, the transfer in, and then they said basically, hey, he's going to miss the majority of the season. So I just always assumed 8 to 10 games, like felt like the conservative of number there. And then they come out now, I guess, this past week and said, hey, he's actually on a quicker timetable. Luke Haas is always hurt, so take that with a grain of salt of like what that recovery is like. There's so much time between now and week 4, 5, 6 where he could hit a setback. They do have a week 6 bye, so you wonder, hey, do they maybe wait until week 7 to bring him back to give him kind of that like extra week of rehab? Considering the cost of Daquan Wright right now, I am totally cool with still drafting him. He's my highest owned tight end on Underdog, and that's because I think even with Luke Haas, both of them could score a lot of touchdowns. The volume is not going to be there if they're both healthy, but this is a really good passing offense. If he gets 6, 7 touchdowns, which could easily happen, he's very usable in those 6 to 7 weeks. So I think the Haas news is not great, it might lower lower where I'm going to be taking him and maybe lessen my ownership a little bit. But ultimately, he needs to fall back a little bit to the cost. But I like the touchdown potential of him, and I think he's a pretty athletic guy that has shown to be a bigger upside type of guy. Last year, yeah, I think he had a game of multiple touchdowns as like a rotational tight end. So yeah, I'm in on him. I wish the news was a little bit better. I'm glad for Luke Haas and his family, but from a fantasy perspective, I wish the news was a little bit maybe worse for him. So I don't know. Where do you stand on Wright?
So again, looking at my tight end projections, like once Haas went down, I took all confidence discount away from Wright because I was like, okay, then if Haas is down, Wright's the clear number one guy for Ole Miss. I'll give him full projection of what I expect the Ole Miss tight end one to look like. That bumped him up to tight end 10 for me. And so now with the Haas who's coming back, I'm giving him my first tier of just confidence discount because I still think Wright's going to be the tight end one here. Clearly, like you can't really count on Haas at this point if you're the coaching staff with his injury. He's transferring in. Wright's been around for, I forget, this is his second year with Ole Miss now, right? So, like, he's been around for a full year. Haas came in late. He's injured. You can't really count on him whatsoever. So, I think they'll count on Wright quite a bit. So, I'll give him my first tier of discount here. That bumps him back down to, like, tight end 17 for me. But even still, like, I still think he's a fantastic tight end 2 option for the most part. I agree with you. The way that Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss use their tight ends is great in terms of how they use them downfield. They're not just your quick short route possession kind of guys. Catch the ball 6-7 yards down the field, see if you can get a couple yards afterwards. No, these are guys that are running full routes. They're athletic. They can absolutely score touchdowns. And again, with Ole Miss's wide receiver room up in the air, there's a lot of potential for a guy like Daquan Wright, who has been with the system here, to earn himself a bigger role. My projection likes him quite a bit. It's got him currently at 386 and 4 touchdowns. Oh, wait, no, never mind. I've got him at 31 receptions, 446 yards, and about 4 or 5 touchdowns. I think that feels like the floor for an Ole Miss tight end.
I was just gonna say that would be a step back from what he did last year. He played in 9 games and ended with 26 for 361 and 4 touchdowns. He was catching a touchdown every 10 passes thrown to him. So good positive numbers. And you mentioned the yards per target, like confirming that, like him and Caden Prescorn both averaged around 10 yards per target. So it wasn't just like a right thing and maybe a limited sample size that impacted that number. So those are all positives as well. And who knows, maybe Austin Simmons is a little bit more pass friendly to the tight end to continue that.
What about Jack Velling, this other guy you wanted to discuss in this range?
Jack Velling is is a little bit similar to Gillenborg, right? Like the volume is there. I think he hit, Frotown loves to say the 440, 400, 4 touchdowns, 40 receptions, 400 yards. Like as a tight end, if you're not getting that, you're not really in the conversation. And he can 100% hit that mark very easily.
Agreed.
The problem is the tight ends weren't there. The touchdowns were not there for him last year. And because of that, he was essentially worthless. They fed him the ball all season. It didn't matter. Aiden Childs as a first-year starter was unimpressive. I think he'll be better. Who knows how much better? But I think better enough to make it where Velling is impactful as a tight end. As long as the volume is there, I think he'll be fine. Because at Oregon State with the same staff, I think he had 8 touchdowns. So to see him go from 8 with the same staff to Michigan State and only score twice, I think it was, like, that feels like a regression, a little bit too much of a regression there.
Yeah, I've got him projected for 4 touchdowns on the year, and I agree with you that there's a lot to suggest that Velling can absolutely outperform what he did last year. I've got him at tight end 13. I think that's right where he's going to finish. Again, you give him two more touchdowns compared to what he had last year. Actually, let me see. I have the stats pulled up here, or at least I thought I had the stats pulled up. I don't know where they went now. Here we are. Nope, that's rankings. There we go. Found my thing. So let me find Velling real quick. The Velling finished in the regular season as tight end 45 last year. He finished with, let's see, how many fantasy points? There it is. So he finished with 72.5. Never mind. 65.1. So if you give him 2 more touchdowns based on what he got last year, you're already back into the top 30 for tight ends. And then I think, again, if you give him that consistent volume again, he absolutely, again, I agree. He's got that 40, and 4 upside right there. Yeah, he'll be back again. God, I'm like jumbling through here. Let me try this one more time. Yes, Velling is one of those guys that you want to target. He has a potential to be the top target for Michigan State this year. Obviously, they have Nick Nash there, but I do think Aiden Childs and him being together for so long, they're going to consistently target him. It's year 2 for Michigan State with Jonathan Smith and this staff here. They should be better than last year. You're expecting some kind of jump there. The touchdowns will come. I think Velling will be just fine. I think he's one of the safer floor tight ends you can get right now.
So. I liked it. The second try was much better. I mean, I think he feels like a very safe, cheap option. Like you're not paying up for him. He's not being in the top 6 or 7, 8 tight ends being drafted. So, if you believe that Childs can improve and the offense will improve, which there's no reason for it not to, then that's a good spot to be. The offense, the schedule is, I think, fairly soft to start the year, and then it's about impossible for the playoffs. About as impossible as it gets. Maybe game script is helpful in that regard, but
could be.
He does have some schedule stuff that I think is helpful, at least in the maybe your regular season of redraft leagues.
Yeah, like you said, he's tight end 13 in ADP right now, but that's 15th round. So if you miss out on some of the top guys and everything, this is absolutely somebody you should be targeting later on. All right. Let's go and move on to our second tier of tight ends here, tight ends 13 through 24. This will be the last tier we discuss for tight ends this week. At number 13, we got Seydou Traore, the tight end out of Mississippi State. At number 14, we have Elijah Lofton out of Miami of Florida. Number 15, we got Max Clare out of Ohio State. Number 16, we have Houston Thomas out of UTSA. Number 17, we got RJ Maryland out of SMU. Number 18, we got Dorian Fleming, the former tight end out of Georgia State, now at Maryland. Number 19, we have Michael Smith out of South Carolina. Number 20, we have Eli Raridan out of Notre Dame. At 21, we got Hogan Hansen out of Michigan. Number 22, we got Michael Trigg out of Baylor. Number 23, we got Oscar Delp out of Georgia. And number 24, we got Tanner Koziol, the former tight end out of Ball State, now at Houston. Okay, I will ask you. We got a couple guys in this range before we get into the 2 guys you want to discuss and everything. But guys like Tanner Koziol and Dorian Fleming, elite tight end options last year at the G5 level, now moving up to the Power 4. Are we being too generous keeping them here in the top 24? Because I'll be real, like Fleming, I'm a bit more understanding of, but Koziol at Houston, I've drafted 0 of Koziol this year. How are you kind of dealing with some of these tight ends that are that transferred out of their elite spots last year?
I think you've said it in the past that like transfer tight ends don't necessarily fare well more often than not. And some of these are like Fleming from G5 to P4 is certainly a jump, even if it is Maryland. I think what we're seeing is there's a group of tight ends we love in the top 12. There's some others that we like here in this next set of 12, but then it is a little bit of like, all right, like who could you possibly take? Like there's a lot of options that just don't really, that all have some sort of wart that makes you not really all that interested in them or feel like they're risky. So, sometimes it's better to take, well, we've seen a guy be produced in the past, maybe there's this transfer and that's a negative, but also we've seen him have huge games and like maybe the system has shown to be a little bit positive as well. So I think it's just a matter of like, who else would you put above, like some of these guys are as uninspiring as the rest. It's just a matter of like which one you decide to throw in there.
I mean, I've nuked Koziol in my rankings. I've got him down at wide receiver, tight end 45. So like I'm completely out on that one. But Fleming, I'm pretty up on. I got him at tight end 19 because I legitimately wonder who else Maryland's going to throw to at this point.
Well, yeah, some of these guys are bigger frame guys too, right? So like you're hoping for like Tanner Koziol, I have him at 27, and it's more a hope of like, okay, well, like who are they throwing to? And like he's huge, so maybe they with Weigman as a legitimate option at quarterback compared to what they've had in the past, like maybe he finds 6 or 7 touchdowns just because he is like the solo threat there. But yeah, it is. Some of these guys are a little bit more interesting than not. It's just like I don't like who could I possibly put above him, whatever. It's a little bit of
Yeah.
a harder game here at tight end.
Well, let's talk about some of the guys you do want to talk about in this range, Kay. And you wanted to discuss RJ Maryland out of SMU and Michael Smith out of South Carolina. Maryland, another guy that's had quite the roller coaster in terms of recent news for him. What do we got there, Kay?
I mean, if he's healthy, he's an elite tight end, right? That's the big
Oh, yeah.
question is like, where does he stand? Last year in, let's see, maybe 6 games, he had 24 catches for 359 yards and 4 touchdowns. Like he's basically producing at like, I don't know, you probably have it like a tight end 40 level, and he played half the season. When I looked at my stuff for P4 only, he was a top 5 or 6, maybe even like a top 4 tight end for P4 only in terms of fantasy points per game. So, you get a returning quarterback that loves to throw to the tight end. You saw who replaced him, Matthew Hibner, be super successful in the passing game. So they love the tight end role. You could be a little bit cautious because, hey, is Hibner going to eat into any of Maryland's production? But they love Maryland. They've hyped him up. They said he's running, not taking hits. They said he's going to be ready for week 1. On a different podcast at some point in the offseason, somebody had said, like, I think it was Austin, like, if there's a team that needs a player to be back and to like lean on them, it's SMU, right? If they want to make the playoff again, they need to have him healthy, but also like they kind of will probably push him a little bit. It's not like the tight end at Notre Dame last year, Mitchell Evans, where they were just beating teams left and right. They didn't necessarily need him, so they were more cautious with the injuries. So I was super cautious because of the timeline was near identical to Mitchell Evans. But once they came out and said, hey, he's looking healthy, I mean, this is a guy that is like a fake tight end that is really just a big receiver like Gadsden was for Syracuse, and he's been super productive in his career.
Yeah, Maryland, to your point, was at his height, he was a top 32 tight end for college fantasy. He had a lot rougher start to the season last year than I remember him having, but he really kind of started taking off a little bit in the middle of the season there. And then obviously the injury happened, and the rest is history there. But like you said, like if he is healthy, he's an incredible discount right now, considering that, let's see, where's he going in ADP right now? I know in he's currently going as tight end 15 in drafts right now. If you can grab him as your second tight end, I think that's excellent. I think
or like back to back, right? You take Maryland and then you take another guy that you like. You could do it that way too, or take him as your first tight end, but then take another one pretty fairly quickly.
Exactly. Like I think if you're taking him and not relying on him, you're feeling really, really good about that, because the upside with him is absolutely incredible. If he's ready week 1, he's been going at way too high of a discount. But that's the thing, is we don't know whether to trust that at all. I forget. He again, he's about 10 months removed from when he tore his ACL, right?
Yeah,
so
he had it was like end of October.
You're kind of right on that borderline of when you're feeling good about him being able to return. Even then, a lot of guys that tear their ACL, you don't see them return to 100% until almost 2 years afterwards. But obviously, like, you see a lot of guys 10, 12 months later, they're playing, right? But you don't see them get out there and just do what they were doing before. But at the same time, if Maryland's an athletic freak and he's able to heal well from it, like, I see no reason why not to take him as your second tight end at this point. I've got him ranked as my tight end 16 right now. So like I'll shoot for him as my tight end 2 every single time.
Where would you rank him if he never had the injury? Like if he just never had the injury, where would you put him?
If he never had the injury, I can tell you exactly where I would rank him. I would have him as my tight end 7 right now.
And that honestly kind of feels a little conservative, considering he's got a really good group around him with a soft schedule, and Kevin Jennings, proven productive quarterback that has thrown to him. So that's like, sure. I mean, that's just that injury discount you're getting.
Yep, absolutely. What about Michael Smith here? What do you want to talk about with him?
They have hyped up him a little bit. I think it was Joshua Simon that said like Michael Smith is like the next guy that should be really productive. And including the bowl game, Joshua Simon caught 40 passes for 519 yards and 7 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So while the receiver group, it feels very spread out, like that's not acceptable for a receiver. For Michael Smith, assuming he's the guy, which a lot of people have hyped up, and with Lenore Sellers, showing he's throwing to the quarterback and doesn't mind throwing to non-receivers, like it just feels like Michael Smith's a pretty good discount or a pretty good value And I mean, he was fairly productive. Was he a redshirt freshman last year or true freshman?
Redshirt freshman last year.
So, not the craziest of numbers, but 106 yards and a touchdown and fairly limited action as a redshirt freshman in the SEC. Like, you see glimpses of why people are hyping him up. And so, yeah, I'm interested in him at his cost for sure.
This has kind of been a sneaky good tight end like system the last couple of years, right? You had Joe Simon last year, and then who's the Arkansas transfer? Trey Knox came over to South Carolina. They had he performed pretty well for them. So if those guys are sitting there saying that yeah, Michael Smith's that next dude at tight end for South Carolina, I'll take shots on that all day long. Like if I've got Smith currently projected I've got him at a little bit of a confidence discount just because of the injury, but I've currently got him projected for 41 receptions, 433 yards, and 4 touchdowns for the season. So tight end projections are so annoying because I have so many guys that are right at that 4,404 range that Eric Froton loves so much, but so there's not a huge difference between all these guys, but I think Smith in the system is a pretty safe bet to hit that system. Like you said, hit that threshold. That's the word I'm looking for. I've drafted a ton of Smith. I backed off a little bit, mostly because I didn't want to get caught with too many shares if that injury is worse than we're kind of letting on for him to at least start the season. So that's my only real concern with Smith right now.
It does feel like everybody is hurt or was hurt.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, am I going to stop, reducing production from guys? But yeah, you always have to be hesitant. You don't be overboard on one guy, especially if there is a little bit of injury lingering. But
I think there's about a month period where I think I took Smith in every draft that I could.
It's not a bad. I mean, you're almost free in some of these leagues and some of the drafts at some point in the offseason. So, if you're a believer of Lenore Sellers have a big season, he's going to do it with some of it through the air. I thought he improved through the air as well in the second half of the season. So it's only going to benefit him even more if he throws 25 touchdowns.
Yeah, you're talking about free. Michael Smith currently tight end 60 in drafts right now.
It's hard not to take him as your final tight end. And
yeah, why not? Because in 30-round best ball drafts right now for college fantasy, full FBS, not underdog. How many tight ends are you taking typically?
I'm always taking 4.
I usually am going for 4 tight ends, but this year I've decided I wanted that extra slot for a wide receiver or a running back, whichever position I didn't feel as good about by the end of a draft. So I've been just going with 3 tight ends. And like I said, Smith at one point was just my 3rd tight end, just auto draft for so long. So he's got a great upside. Some guys I want to discuss in this range. I want to take a look at Seydou Traore. Oh my God, I can't speak today. Seydou Traore out of Mississippi State and Max Clare out of Ohio State. Start with Traore. Last year was Traore's first year returning to ball since 2022. After he's kind of forced to sit in 2023, it makes sense. He transferred to Colorado. Was there one semester before he transferred to Mississippi State. NCAA said, for some reason, you of all people have to sit a year compared to the hundreds of other people that managed to still play somehow. Anyway, obviously the time away and the increase in competition led to Traore kind of taking a step back last year, right? Last year he had 34 receptions, 360 yards, and a touchdown. 2 years before that, at Arkansas State, he was looking at 49 receptions, 628 yards, 4 touchdowns. Dude was an absolute beast for CFF in 2022. Now, he's at Mississippi State. Like I said, he took a step back last year, but Mississippi State's wide receiver room cleared out last year, and Traore returns as the leading returning receiving option for this team. I've made my love for Anthony Evans and Brennan Thompson, whichever one of those guys ends up winning the slot. I've made my love for those guys clear, and I think whoever wins that slot will lead the team in receiving. But I also don't think we can entirely ignore the guy who saw 54 targets last year at the tight end position. Mississippi State will be playing from behind a lot. Hopefully Shapen stays healthy this time around. And I think there's room for 2 receiving options on this offense to be CFF relevant, especially if one of those guys has tight end eligibility, right? The threshold to be CFF relevant at the tight end position is way lower than at the receiving position. So I think it's very possible that, Thompson, Evans, whoever gets that slot position, they're CFF relevant. And then Traore himself, also CFF relevant here, especially another year of experience under his belt. Hopefully he can catch a few more touchdowns. He only had 1 touchdown last year. Another guy, kind of like Velling, that I'm sitting here like, he's got the volume. This is a team that will score some touchdowns this year. Again, Jeff Lebby is running this offense. This is year 2 for him. They should see a jump this year. I like where Traore is sitting at. What about you, Kay?
He's shown to be productive in the past. He has had these weird things happen with like I think it was transferring to Colorado, then back, and it wouldn't let him. And so he sits, was fairly productive. It's there. What's nice thing is, that they want to pass. The game script is going to call for them to pass. And you also have Blake Shapen, an older veteran quarterback that should be the starter for them. And if so, then it means he's likely to throw to tight ends. Like, I don't know how many freshmen or sophomores are going to be all that great at throwing to tight ends. Sometimes they're safety blankets. Sometimes they're not the first read because typically they want to throw to the receiver. So I like him. I think there's a lot of positives to him. I think there's a reason why he's fairly cheap-ish. There is some risk in taking a tight end on an awful team. Like, that's probably going to be beaten up pretty bad, but the system is fairly helpful. He's been productive, and ultimately there's not like a bunch of other options that they're going to known throw to, right? It's pretty open up for grabs.
Yeah, and again, we've seen Lebby as well have productive tight ends at UCF, at Ole Miss, at Oklahoma, everywhere he's gone. It's not been consistent year to year, right? But, he's willing to use them if he's got them. And Traore, very much that tight end wide receiver hybrid. I think they'll use him quite a bit. Other guy I want to discuss in this range is Max Clare out of Ohio State. As I've done multiple times throughout this Crash Course series, sometimes I just pick guys that I don't really have a strong opinion on one way or the other. I just kind of feel like they've been under-discussed, or like there's a lot being assumed about them. And so, to me, Max Clare is one of those guys that people just kind of threw into their rankings this year without really thinking about why he should be going so high. And I'm here to tell you that once I really started looking into it, there's plenty of reasons to like where Max Clare is going. Like, I'll start with the things I don't like, because I like ending on a positive note. But the main drawback here is Clare likely being the third option in this Ohio State passing game, right? A lot of times when you're looking at tight ends, you're looking for guys that are going to be either the first or second read in their offense, and that can really kind of provide you a really nice safe floor. Versus Clare, that's not what we're expecting here. But as we've seen with a guy like Cade Stover, that doesn't mean there still can't be production here, right? Cade Stover was a monster for Ohio State 2 years in a row. In 2023, he had 51 targets, 576 yards, 5 touchdowns. In 2022, 49 receptions, 406 yards, 5 touchdowns. Like, he looked good in both of those years. And in both years, he was the third, if not the fourth option in his passing game. So, Ohio State, they're good enough offense. They can support a tight end, even if it doesn't mean that he's the top option. But then, the other thing is, though, that recently we've seen kind of a dip in the tight end production, right? Obviously, Stover had his great year in 2023, but then G. Scott came along last year, and boy, 31 targets in 16 games is not something to be super excited about. But the good news is that I think Clare is legitimately a great tight end. He had 1.91 yards per route in his collegiate career so far, which is fantastic for a tight end. I think he's much better than G. Scott. I think they went out and got him for a reason. The other thing that I think you have to like about Clare here is that Ohio State does not really have a clear slot target right now. They got Brandon Inniss, they got Bryson Rogers. I know some people are talking about Mylan Graham maybe being moved over to the slot. But when you talk about those options, people are mostly just kind of shrugging their shoulders at those guys, right? Versus Clare, if he becomes the go-to over-the-middle target here, and if he's as good as we think he is, he'll easily outperform the 45 targets I have laid aside for him in projections right now, and he has a very high ceiling if he can kind of take over that middle of the field role. What do you think, Kay?
For the reasons you said, I think there's a reason to like him, right? Like he could very easily be the third option. He is shown to be productive with an awful quarterback, awful, I won't say system, but like awful offense and team at Purdue. He was fed the ball at Purdue, which was nice if you played him and used him across the board. But like, my concern would be how good is this offense relative to years past? Maybe in the passing game, it felt like it was always the super efficient beast. Obviously, when you have like Marvin Harrison and Jeremiah Smith, like that just happens. So you wonder, if he gets less targets, which is almost guaranteed, like how efficient can he be in the offense? Like, how good is Julian Sayin or Lincoln Kienholz? Can they support a third option in the offense? I don't have a lot of clear because I'm not sure I buy into like how good the passing game is going to be to support like three receiver targets. But I wouldn't scoff at anybody that thinks that he's a perfectly fine option. I definitely think he could be the third option in the passing game. That's not really the debate for me. It's just more a matter of like how good is the quarterback play to warrant a fairly high pick on a third option in this offense.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up real quick. Where is he going? He's tight end 8 in ADP right now. I think I've got him tight end 15. We've got him ranked at tight end 15. I definitely like where we have him a lot more. Grab him as a second option, just as a piece of a really good offense. But don't draft him as high as tight end 8 as somebody you have to rely on week to week there. All right. Let's go ahead and talk about some guys that we think are, speaking of which, some guys that we think are being drafted too high here, Kay. This is your favorite part, Kay. You get to hate. It's beautiful. Let's just go ahead and talk about your two guys here, Kay, that you have going too high. You have Terrence Carter, the former tight end out of Louisiana Lafayette, now at Texas Tech. And then you also have Luke Reynolds, the tight end out of Penn State. They are tight end 19 and 12 in ADP, respectively. Let's start with Carter. What are your thoughts there?
I like Carter, and he's athletic. The problem is just the system for Texas Tech. And as you put it in the notes, like there's just a lot of guys to throw the football to. The volume will be there, which is nice in the passing game. But like, is he realistically the fourth or fifth option in the offense? I don't know if I really want to do that. I might take a shot at him. I've drafted him on Underdog when it's like, oh, he's there in like the 18th or 19th round. Yeah, I'll do it once or twice. But otherwise, I'll just look elsewhere. I just think that when you're the fourth or fifth option in an offense and you're not likely to get the touchdowns, like you're not like a touchdown heavy guy, it's just typically never worth drafting, unfortunately, because he was awesome at Louisiana and it would have been again if he would have stayed.
Yeah, I'm trying to look and see if I can find where did he go? Where did he go? The tight end they had last year. Yeah, Jalen Conyers finished as tight end 25 last year. But also, I think people need to remember that this is not Zach Kittley running this offense anymore. I do think the passing volume is going to take a bit of a step back, because as much as we like G.J. Kinney, they love to run the ball over there at Texas State in the passing game. Well, not secondary. Again, they were just a very fast-paced offense, so they got a lot of volume on both sides. But it's still not going to be what Kittley was doing during his time at Texas Tech. And that's all the more worrying, like you said, Kay, when you have Coy Eakin, Caleb Douglas, Reggie Virgil, Micah Hudson, all of these guys to feed. To me, it feels like Carter is a fine best ball play. I think you'll get 2 or 3 really good weeks out of him. I think there will be weeks where they identify him as a mismatch against some of those Big 12 defenses, and they'll heavily target him in those games. But in terms of a week-to-week guy and drafting him this high, I personally can't do it. I'm not really targeting guys that I think are going to be potentially 4 or 5 when it comes to the totem pole of targets. What about Luke Reynolds? What are your thoughts there?
Real quick, and the thing with Jalen Conyers was he had 2 rushing touchdowns. So I know it sounds tiny, but when you're shooting for 4, 5, 6 touchdowns to be relevant, and then he finished as mid-20s. 2 of those were on the ground, which we're not going to get out of Terrence Carter. But
no,
Luke Reynolds, I think his cost is dropping, and it's not as bad as it was to start. But I mean, he seems like a really great NFL potential talent. But to me, I don't see how you could ever think that he's going to come anywhere near Tyler Warren in terms of any sort of usage, productivity. And he just initially was being drafted, it felt like, too aggressively. The passing game is going to be fine. They're not going to need to go crazy. Like, they have a soft schedule minus maybe 2 or 3 games, but like his price is just too high for a guy that's not going to have a ton of volume. He's not going to get anywhere near the Warren volume. And also too, right, everybody knows, right, Khalil Dinkens is going to start. That means he's on the field less, like I don't really want my tight end to be on the field less, even if Dinkens is like kind of a ceremonial senior starter. I think that eats into snaps just enough to hurt Reynolds' upside. So the nice thing is they're going to score a ton of points. Drew Aller is a great quarterback in terms of like short dump offs, and he's athletic, but I just can't get there with Reynolds.
I'm gonna have fun with this one.
Yeah, we'll see.
I'm captain of the Luke Reynolds fan club right now. I got him at tight end 6 in my ranking. So you think he's going too high? I think he's going too low. People keep talking about like Khalil Dinkens starting. Penn State runs 12 personnel all the time. They constantly have 2 tight ends out there because, again, that's where their strength is. That's where they've recruited a ton. Their receiving room is not as great, so why would you put 3 or 4 receivers out there when you could put out more tight ends in that room, right? Their offense includes 2 different types of tight ends. You got that inline blocker, and then you usually have the receiving option. Tyler Warren, obviously that receiving option last year. Khalil Dinkens will be that inline blocker. That is the role he has played most of his career. Reynolds looks to be that receiving option. You can look at their stats the last couple of years and you can really see it, right? When you look at Reynolds, he has had a 5.3% of his snaps on the field have been him pass blocking. When he is out there, he is running a receiving route 88.6% of the time. Compare that to Dinkens, who is pass blocking 20% of the time and is running a route 10% less than Reynolds. So Reynolds is very much sliding into that receiving option for this offense. So if you're going to tell me which one to choose between Reynolds or Dinkens, I don't care who's atop the depth chart. Reynolds is going to be the more productive when it comes to fantasy purposes because as of right now, we do not count points per pass block. And you can see it in their the way their pass snaps are split up as well. You got Dinkens inline 55% of the time versus Reynolds is only inline 31% of the time. So again, the roles are very clearly defined there. Reynolds will be the receiving option. If there's going to be a CFF relevant tight end of these 2, it'll be him. And then you mentioned, Kay, obviously nobody here should expect Reynolds to be Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren was a monster last year. He scored 222.6 fantasy points in the regular season last year. But what percentage do you think Reynolds can realistically replace, right? Let's say on the high end, 80%, that's still tight end 5 last year. 70%, also tight end 5 last year. 60%, tight end 7 last year. 50%, tight end 13. You'd have to get down to 40% for Reynolds only to replace 40% of Warren's production last year for him to be outside the top 24 in tight ends. Theoretically, Penn State's going to have more options to throw to than the tight end last year. Again, their wide receivers let them down the stretch. But, you would need to see that position take a massive hit compared to what it's done even the last, 3 years, let alone just last year, for Reynolds not to return value right now.
Except, obviously Warren was incredible last year, but 2 years ago, they split time with tight ends, multiple ones. Tyler Warren wasn't all that super special 2 years ago. He had 7 touchdowns, but he barely broke 400 yards. And then before that, when is the last relevant Penn State tight end? Freiermuth in 2019 was relevant, but otherwise they're good at getting touchdowns, but the volume hasn't been anywhere near. So I'm just saying, when you're 50% of Tyler Warren feels like it's very possible, it's not even out of the world of crazy. 40%, he had 120 something targets in the full season. That's a ton of targets and usage that's just not replicable. I know obviously they played 15 games, but I'm just saying
in my projections, I've got Reynolds for 60 targets.
What type of crazy efficiency does he have to be a top 5 tight end?
12.3 yards per reception, at least in terms of his player. And then the tight end 1 for Penn State over the last 2 years has averaged 12 yards per reception.
What's how many, you said 60 targets and how many receptions?
I've got him projected at...
But I guess with the full stat line is my curiosity.
Full stat line, 60 targets, 43, 44-ish receptions, 529 yards, 5 touchdowns.
And that ends at tight end 5 or whatever?
Tight end 6, yeah. I'm telling you, there's a lot of high floor guys this year, but again, it's hard to pick out the guys that are going to, reach that second level, right? That's why, again, as we discussed earlier, why people are so in on Sadiq, because they feel like he's the best chance to break away from that kind of mid group. But you don't need that. You don't need that much to be a top 12 tight end in CFF.
Right. I would say that type of stat line feels very, I won't say best case, because obviously there's a better case when when Drew Aller just throws touchdowns to tight ends, and we know that. But that feels like it's a very, very close to best case.
How much do you trust Pena and Ross?
I would argue that they probably just run the heck out of it all season. I would 20 pass attempts a game and just run it like crazy would be my guess.
How much are they willing to sacrifice Drew Aller's draft stock for that, though?
I think they're not going to have him the next year, so what's the matter?
Fair enough, I guess.
Plus, I mean, he can let him throw the football. He'll ruin his own draft stock, like I've said for years that nobody wanted to admit until last playoffs.
Fair enough.
I might be a little bit harsh on Reynolds. You do prove a good point. I think maybe people can use the word natty to subscribe, but I think the likelihood of what you provided him is like very aggressive compared to these other guys that we've talked about have high floors. That feels way more conservative.
If I were to like go into my rankings and like push things a little bit, I probably would have Matt Lauder ahead of him in terms of like, we just saw Matt Lauder do it. There's no real projection there. I expect him to do exactly what he did last year. Maybe Blake Bosma moves ahead of him, but like he's also kind of in that range where there's a lot of guys, right? Like Endries technically requires a level of projection, right? So I'm okay with Reynolds being around him. Daquan Wright requires a level of projection. I'm okay with that, like him being around him. Max Clare, another guy that I'm okay with him being around. So it's like, I don't think it's, again, we have that one group, again, I mentioned earlier, we have that one group at the very top of guys we've seen do it before, and there's a lot of question marks after that point. And I think Reynolds being near the top of that, given what we just saw Tyler Warren do last year, and let's also not forget, Reynolds is a former 5-star tight end. Like, this isn't like some, 3-star that, Penn State's developed over 3 years. Like, Reynolds has been a dude since he got to Penn State. Like, he's been a guy waiting in the wings. I fully believe in him being able, again, not to replicate what Warren did last year, but I think he can get at least half of what he got last year. So
what's interesting is the debate of like, all right, do we want to attack a guy like Reynolds, who is going to be a target, a weapon for sure, a group of guys that are not going to be super successful or like very productive in the past game in terms of receivers with a very average quarterback? Or would you rather have Trey'Dez Green similar to Reynolds? I think he's very athletic, but Green is like uber athletic in an offense that could throw for 40 touchdowns and 4,000 yards.
Okay, is that if that was you trying to segue into the guys that I think are being drafted too high, that was A+, sir, and I appreciate you so much for that, because let's talk about the guys that I think are being drafted too high, and my first one, as Kay just mentioned, is Trey'Dez Green. Now, he's come down a little bit. When I first made this sheet, he was tight end 7. He's now tight end 9 in ADP, but I've got him at tight end. I have on the sheet 16, but I actually have him at 17 because I think I moved somebody ahead of him recently. But regardless, it is exactly that debate that you're talking about, Kay, right? Where we saw just last year, Mason Taylor, if he didn't get screwed out of some of those touchdowns last year, he was getting production. 546 yards, only 2 touchdowns to show for it. We know that LSU, especially Brian Kelly, not afraid to use the tight end whatsoever. We like the idea of Green, especially that 2-touchdown game he had in the bowl game to finish the year. I do think the reality is potentially a little bit more disappointing than we think. He only had 7.8 yards per catch in his workload last season. Now, maybe that changes. Obviously, he was a true freshman last year. Another year under the system, he could be used a little bit better. But, he's not super efficient. He's a bit more touchdown dependent in that regard. And then 2, we talked about it all offseason. This LSU wide receiver room, there's a lot of really good options, very similar to Terrence Carter. So it's like, what's the difference between Green and Terrence Carter right now, and why aren't those guys closer in value together? The only thing I could think of is the fact that, again, Brian Kelly actively goes out of his way to use the tight end position, unlike Matt Leftwich and GJ Kinney. Or GJ Kinney's system at the very least. So, okay, how are you kind of squaring where Green's going?
Oh, I really like Trey'Dez Green. We're on the opposite ends like Reynolds. The thing is, the yard per catch stuff is tough because it's such a small sample size. He had 20 targets. He had 4 touchdowns. He had a lot of short yardage touchdowns. He had in the bowl game, he had a 10-yard touchdown pass. He had a catch. He had a 1-yard touchdown catch. And then I think he had another 2 touchdowns were 1 and 11 yards. So like right off the bat, he has 4 catches for like 23 yards. It's small sample size to skew it, so I'm not necessarily concerned about that. What I like about him is the fact that this offense could throw, like if you told me they throw for 3,500 yards and 35 or even 30 touchdowns, that feels very kind of conservative to me. Like that feels like it's very possible. And I kind of just want a piece of that. He's huge, he's athletic. Like Nick Anderson is the other big option, but he's always hurt. Chris Hilton, I think, is more of a field stretcher and not really size dependent. Like, so I think he plays a role, Trey'Dez does, that could be a touchdown scorer. I think I said this months ago on Ball with My Bestie. Like Trey'Dez Green could score 10 touchdowns without a doubt in my mind. And then if that happens, I don't care about his yards per catch, because if it's 7 yards on 40 catches, I mean, 40 for 280 and 10 touchdowns, I mean, that's an incredible season. So I love him because of the touchdown potential. There is caution and concern about like what is the volume overall going to be and what that kind of efficiency on those receptions is going to be. But to me, that's almost a no-brainer that his touchdown rate is going to continue to be impressive.
So my current projection has him at 60 targets, 42 receptions for 370 yards, and 3.5 touchdowns. So 3 to 4 touchdowns. The touchdowns can definitely have room to improve, but this is also why I think he belongs in the second tier of tight ends, right? He belongs in the same tier as like Max Clare, Houston Thomas, who we'll talk about here in a second. Like guys that are part of these really good offenses, but we're not entirely sure where they are in the pecking order in terms of their volume. And you're just going to bet on them having that role. That's a great option for a tight end 2 on your team rather than a tight end 1. Does that make sense to me?
Yeah, and I'm definitely more best ball focused, so I don't necessarily think of it similarly, but there's not a world where he ends with 3.5. Well, obviously he can end with 3.5. There's not a world where he ends up with 3, and even I would say 4 touchdowns. He just had 4 touchdowns, and he barely played last year.
We would have said the same thing about Jack Velling after his first year at Oregon State.
Yeah.
And then he went down to 1.
But we have Garrett Nussmeier. We don't have Aiden Childs, right? Like, there's a difference. And you could say, well, the touchdowns haven't been there in the past for LSU tight ends. Well, like, not every team has Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors and all these other insane receivers that go for 15 touchdowns a year, right? There's not one person on this team that's going to score 15 touchdowns at the receiver position, right? Like 10, 12 even, probably not happening. So it's not like you have to worry about a Malik Neighbors getting 17 of the 35 touchdowns. That's why I think, like, if I could make a bet on anything, I would say over 3.5, like, without a doubt.
Or this LSU offense isn't as good as we think it'll be.
I mean, do you think that's possible? I mean,
we see offenses every single year that we are so convinced are going to be so good, and they just fall flat on their face. Like, to a lesser degree, like Rice comes to mind last year, where we were so big on like, oh yeah, Rice is going to be fine. They got EJ Warner back there, fits perfectly in this system. They got good receivers, and they got Dean Connors. They got all the pieces they need. They'll be great in the AAC, and then just completely fell flat on its face.
I think there is a difference between Warner and Rice and LSU and Nussmeier, but one thing that helps me a little bit too is that this receiver group feels very average to good, and they were good, average to good last year, and were also successful enough. I think what you might be concerned about is like the defenses and how they might play Nussmeier, and does that help or hurt Trey'Dez?
We'll discuss the defense for LSU a little bit when we get there, but like I consider putting them in my top 12 DSTs because they are legitimately one of the most talented defenses, so their range of outcomes year to year is very big. Because I don't like that defensive staff there. We saw last year that they absolutely underperformed their defensive talent. But because they still have that defensive talent, if they just get the right things to click, they can absolutely outperform what they did the last 2 years, and that could spell trouble for the CFF upside for LSU because they're not having to score nearly as much. So definitely an interesting point there. Last guy I want to discuss here on tight ends being drafted too high is Arlis Boardingham. I'll be quick about this one. Guys, the dream's dead. People are still holding on to this way too much. When, the head coach at Bowling Green left for the NFL, any hope of Arlis Boardingham being a CFF option went out the window. You look at Eddie George and Travis Partridge, who are coming in, the new staff and everything. Here is the average over the last 3 years of a Travis Partridge tight end. 33 targets, 20 receptions, 232 yards, 3.7 touchdowns. Like, you might hold on to that touchdown number right there, but for a guy that's going tight end 23 still in drafts right now, like, guys, I think, like, take him as your tight end 3, 4, whatever. I'm fine with that, but, like, still taking him as your tight end 2. I think we're holding on to the dream too much. Any quick thoughts on Arlo Sporting him, K?
Yeah, I wasn't super in on him just because it felt like what's his name? Fana was more like just a specific player's talent and freak, right? I will say Drew Pine is a nice transfer for Boardingham in terms of getting a quarterback that can throw him the football. But yeah, I will take Boardingham if he's there in like the 30th round of a best ball, maybe. But otherwise, I'm completely out.
All right, let's get positive here, Kay. Let's talk about some tight ends we think are going too low. I got 2 undrafted guys in a lot of drafts right now that I think should be going a little bit higher, so I'll just go through those real quick. Ethan Connor out of Troy. I've got him as my tight end 21. Dude saw 14 targets in 3 games last year before he got hurt. He was on pace for 55 targets on the season. Troy needs a new go-to option, and Connor, at least based on what we've seen out of the limited coverage that we have got and the G5 Hive episode, it seems like that Connor is absolutely one of those guys stepping up for the Trojans, even though he is coming back from injury. And despite my reservation that, Troy's offense may not be very good this year, so I think that kind of caps his touchdown upside, I'm willing to bank on Connor potentially being a leading receiving option for the Trojans this year, especially if a guy like Ra Thomas doesn't pan out. I'm more than happy to take him as my tight end 2 or 3 option in a draft. Okay, you got quick thoughts on Connor?
I almost nabbed him in this Thor league. I missed him just barely. Bacon Fueled got him, so that's a good sign. If you like him, you like seeing Bacon take him because he's a smart guy.
And then the other guy that I am drafting a ton of goes along with my Bryson Barnes love, and that is his tight end, Brock Lane. Again, undrafted in ADP right now. I've got him as my tight end 29. Only returning receiving option for Utah State from last year. While Utah State, as I've learned recently, did kind of have some pretty good under-the-radar wide receiver transfers coming in, like, Brady Boyd, Braden Pegan. It does seem pretty clear that Lane is going to continue to be a pretty big part of this offense. Like, Mendenhall during the Mountain West media days seemed pretty upset when he found out that Lane wasn't considered preseason first team All Mountain West. And considering his competition at that point is John Michael Gillenborg, who I already said how much I love him earlier, that tells me that they're pretty clearly invested in making Lane a big part of this offense this year. And maybe that was some... not rat poison. What's some fuel for the fire for Brock Lane this year, and the fact that he wasn't considered preseason All Mountain West team. And speaking of Lane, last year he only played in 6 games, in which he saw 25 targets, 197 yards, 2 touchdowns. That alone is on pace for 50 targets, 394 yards, and 4 touchdowns, which almost hits that Froton 404 line by itself. Now imagine you take every receiving option out of that room, and Lane's the only guy with a year-plus experience of connection with Bryson Barnes. I think he can beat that line. Given that Lane's going, round 30-plus in drafts, I scooped up a ton of him at the end of drafts. I mentioned earlier I usually take 3 tight ends. Lane is my tight end 3 a lot of times, and considering that he could lead this team in receiving yards, I think he's worth taking a shot on.
That's good for me. I have no idea about Brock Lane. There's sometimes where, especially because I'm still focused on P4, it's like I'm not necessarily too concerned on the tight end for Utah State. So you make a good case for him, though. What
about the tight ends that you want to talk about here, Kay? You took the easy route. You just picked 2 tight ends on the same team here with Houston Thomas and Patrick Overmeyer. What are your thoughts, man?
I think these guys are, I think they're #good. I think they play in an offense that is going to be very good in the UTSA passing attack. Like, McCown's awesome. They have a couple good receivers. It's thinned out a little bit. For the life of me, I could not tell you which one's left, and I know Amador's back.
Carpenter left, and
DeCorian Clark's gone. R.I.P.
Yeah, Clark's finally gone as well.
And Willie McCoy and McEwen, are they both back, or is one of them gone?
McCoy's back.
Okay, so like I said, the group is talented, but here and there, who's staying, who's going, I have no idea. I know Amador's there, and I love Amador, but this is going to be a team that throws for like 28, 30 touchdowns. I could see easily. McCown's great. He threw 12 touchdowns to tight ends last season, which is shocking to me.
Yep.
Had no idea it was that high. Oscar Cardenas is gone, so there's 3 vacant touchdowns. Dan Dishman, I just looked on the roster. He's back. 3 touchdowns on 19 targets. Good for him. But these 2 top guys had 100 combined targets, essentially. They really moved and gelled in the second half of the season, just the offense, the tight ends. You're not paying a high price for them, but I think you're getting a piece of a really good offense. And if I'm correct, Overmeyer is essentially free. Thomas, you have to pay a little bit for, but Overmeyer is basically free.
Overmeyer is basically free. I really wish one of these guys had transferred out, because if you gave me just one of these guys in this system, I'd be all over it. I'm still kind of in on Houston Thomas, but at the end of the day, I don't think I've drafted any of him, and definitely have not drafted any of Overmeyer. I'll get to why in a second there, but like, at the end of the day, you are dealing with 2 guys in an already crowded receiving room having to compete against each other. That to me spells a lot of room for a huge bust for both of these guys, right? Because look at what they did last year. Houston Thomas in 2024's fantasy points per game, tight end 73. Patrick Overmeyer in 2024, fantasy points per game, tight end 80. Right? I think it's fine to grab pieces of offenses that you like, especially, again, as I mentioned, tight end 2, totally fine. But I don't know if this is really the way to do it for UTSA. I'd rather take my shot on Willie McCoy, who goes even later than Houston Thomas, right? But I can't get there with Thomas. I have him as tight end 15 because on 50 targets, he can get to that 400 yards, 4 touchdown line. Totally fine with that. He's got nice yards per catch, 13.2. I believe in him a lot more than Overmeyer, because Overmeyer only had 9.1 yards per reception last year, and the tight end 2 for UTSA has averaged about 40 targets in 12 games. And for me, that projects out to about 257 yards and 2 touchdowns in my rankings. I can't do it. I think Overmeyer, if you're stuck as tight end 2 for your team, you're just capping yourself in terms of what your tight end can do for you. So I say no to Overmeyer. I'm totally with you on Thomas, though. I think Thomas, with the way he's used, he can get there.
See, I like Overmeyer as like a 4th tight end in a best ball where you're not depending. I've actually taken
if Thomas goes down for whatever reason, like Overmeyer instantly increases the value.
I think it wouldn't shock me if he gets 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, just because I think that the touchdowns will be there in terms of the total offense. But yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't want him in like a redraft where he's my 2nd tight end. Like, he's a guy I would pay attention to because his offensive role could be elite if Thomas were to go down. Yeah, so I think cost definitely matters and the format definitely matters for Overmeyer, whereas Thomas, not so much.
All right, let's get to the fun part, Kay. Let's talk. Talk defenses, special teams, and kickers here. We'll start with the DSTs because I think there's a little bit more to talk about here than kickers. Again, we'll get to the discussion about kickers here in a second. I have my top 12 DSTs on the screen. For those of you who are interested, I'll run through those real quick. I got number 1, Texas, number 2, Ohio State, number 3, Alabama, number 4, Michigan, number 5, Penn State, number 6, Clemson, number 7, Notre Dame, number 8, Tennessee, number 9, Indiana, number 10, Army, number 11, Georgia, number 12, Illinois. Kay, I know for a fact you did not prepare your own top 12 DSTs for today, so you get to just react to what I have on the board. What sticks out to you?
As the famous Colin once said on Campus Life, yeah, that looks good to me. No, I mean, I think ultimately when you're looking at defenses, it needs to be, there's a huge help to having Big Ten defenses because, like, teams just melt and do nothing in November, which is always a positive. I mean, Ohio State's incredible with all the talent they have defensively. They have some of the best defensive players, period. And then you just look at like schedule advantages, right? Like Notre Dame makes a ton of sense for me. Tennessee has a great schedule to take advantage of. Indiana, I think Georgia's schedule is probably not as great as you'd like it to be, but I think their talent makes up for it. So it's really kind of a mix of like, what are we recruiting with, like 4-star, 5 stars, and then you combine it with schedules that are appealing, and that's how you could formulate a pretty good top 12. I mean, this looks to be like a pretty legitimate top 12. Army, I would say maybe, I don't know, I'd have to look at the numbers, but like the problem with Army might be is that like they're never playing defense, right? Like you get an advantage of low scoring offenses against them because the Army always holds on to the football. But I don't know. I mean, it looks good to me as a top 12.
Yeah, that's kind of what stood out to me with Army. Again, they got a pretty good returning production rank at 21st They're going the AAC. They're going to want to shoot for an AAC title again this year. I think, I agree with you that you're probably not going to get any, defensive touchdowns out of them. You're probably not going to get a ton of sacks or anything because they just don't have the dudes to do that. But again, if you want to just shoot for low-scoring guys, I also wanted to throw in at least one G5 team into this because you do have G5 teams that kind of pop out every year, and I think that's one of the safer bets you can bet on in the G5. There goes my notes again.
I was just gonna say defense is interesting because this is could be the craziest scoring variations from one league to another. I think the OG Zach and Andrew Katz league that I'm in, it's 20 or 30 points if you get a shutout. So those types of things matter. For maybe an Army, it's a plus, where it's a little bit of a negative for a different team like a Bama or something, right? Because maybe Bama forces turnovers more and gets those touchdowns, whereas Army's strength is lack of scoring against them. And so I think really you need to look at your scoring format and see what exactly does your scoring setup care about the most.
So the other thing that you kind of touched on a little bit was looking at schedules and everything. I'll admit to you, Kay, I didn't look at schedules as much, let me rephrase. I did look at schedules, didn't impact me as much as you think. Really, the only team on here because of their schedule, I think, is Illinois. Illinois got, according to our numbers from CFB Winning Edge, they have the 11th easiest schedule in the Power 4. Every other team, I'm not sure that I really trust, even though they have a quote-unquote easy schedule, that I trust either their defensive roster strength to hold up, or their or the offenses, or excuse me, I don't trust that their defensive pieces are good enough to even stop the easy teams they're facing from scoring on them, right? Because our number one easiest strength of schedule is Wake Forest, right? Do you trust Wake Forest to be able to not stop people from scoring on them?
No,
Texas Tech, West Virginia, Cal,
that's why
Cincinnati.
You incorporate the recruiting side of thing, right? The
For
rankings
sure.
And just the player talent level.
And that's what stood out.
Obviously, what I'm saying is if you're going to punt, things like an easy, ridiculous schedule, like we have in our CFF guide, I think it shows you who are some good matchups. That's where you can take advantage of it.
No, for sure. And you're 100% right. A big thing that stood out to me a lot of times was the defensive roster. Oh my God, I can't speak today. Defensive roster strength, which was provided to us by, again, Nick Allen over at CFB Winning Edge. And almost every single team I have in my top 12 has a 90 or above on that grade, right? Including Illinois, by the way, which is another reason why they made it into my top 12. Because I was like, oh, they got a really talented defense, and they got an easy schedule, and they play in the Big 12. I'll take that all day long. So... But yeah, everything else just kind of boiled down to, again, a lot of Big 12 defenses, especially the top end guys like Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, grab those guys. And then the top defenses in the SEC, Texas, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia. It's hard not to include those guys year to year, even if there are some defensive coordinator changes. But that's another thing I noticed. There are some defensive coordinator changes that happen in the top 12, and normally that would be enough for me to move some guys out. But Clemson, they get rid of Wes Goodwin and they bring in Tom Allen from Penn State, who was, a top 10 defense last year. And then, Penn State loses Tom Allen. Who do they go get? Jim Knowles out of Ohio State. Ohio State, they lose Jim Knowles. Who do they go get? Matt Patricia, who, I don't care what you say about his stuff in the NFL, dude's a really good defensive mind, especially at the college level. They'll be just fine with him.
I accept no positive comments about Matt Patricia.
You're right. I forgot I'm talking to a Lions fan right now.
But yeah, I think the nice thing is with defense is it's probably not as hard to change year over year system. I think offenses take more time to gel with changes of coordinators, whereas defense, I don't know, maybe Justice is going to hate me and DM me and tell me I'm an idiot. But I think maybe it's a little bit easier for defenses to adapt to a new system. But yeah, that is an interesting point.
All right, let's try to finish this up here in the next 5-10 minutes here, Kay. Let's talk about some kickers. I will throw out my quote-unquote rankings for kickers here real quick so you can gather your thoughts on all your incredible strategy when it comes to selecting kickers in college fantasy, K. But number one, I got Dominic Zavada out of Michigan. Totally butchered that last name, by the way. Number 2, Peyton Woodring out of Georgia. Number 3, Colin Rogers out of SMU. Number 4, Damian Ramos out of LSU. Number 5, Caden Chittenden, the former kicker out of UNLV, now at USC. Number 6, Blake Craig out of Missouri. Number 7, Randy Bond out of Texas A&M. Number 8, Lucas Carnero, the kicker out of Ole Miss. Number 9, David Olano, the kicker out of Illinois. Number 10, Drew Stevens out of Iowa. Number 11, Bert Auburn, formerly of Texas, now at Miami of Florida. And then number 12, Jaden Fielding out of Ohio State. So, Kay, what are you looking for when you look for kickers in college fantasy?
As the wise, no. I think it's very straightforward. It's just who's going to score a lot of points. And I also would look for returning kickers. I think I would value the kicker that was on the team kicking the year before and was good over maybe not necessarily a transfer, but like the next man up. I have zero data behind it, but it feels like the next man up. I mean, kicking is such a weird psychological thing that, just because you're a 5-star doesn't make you any good, like as a kicker, right? So I would look at those types of guys that have been proven, like Sappington at Oregon and Bond at A&M. Even like my Hokies, this is probably our highest, maybe best position as our kicker, John Love. Incredible. Our offense is like just good enough to get it close to the red zone a couple of times and kick a couple 50-yarders and you're golden. So
I wish you had told me before this, Kay, because then I would have put John Love in the top 12.
He's not worth the top 12. But that's what you're looking for, right? It's always helpful too to have maybe a defensive-minded coach.
Yeah.
Or like a run-heavy coach like a Michigan or Iowa, those types that want to control the game and are like in their heads thinking, yeah, I can totally win this game 17-10. You don't want the guy that's always going for it. Like if Dan Campbell was coaching in college, you'd be in trouble, right? You would never want his kicker. So yeah, I think just returning production type of thing, and then obviously look at who's going to score the top 25 most points and pinpoint some guys that way.
I would agree with you that the defensive-minded head coach thing does help out a lot. You want to go for a guy like coaches that are not afraid to just take the 3 points, right? They think they can win the game with death by 1,000 paper cuts. They'd rather take the 3 points than even remotely consider the possibility that they turn the ball over and come away with 0 points. That's why you have guys like Dominic Zavada and Peyton Woodring at the top of my kicker rankings here, because Sharon Moore and just Michigan in general last several years, that's just been their MO. Peyton Woodring at Georgia, Kirby Smart, not afraid to take the 3 points and go from there. Other guys that fit that mold here, Blake Craig in Missouri, Randy Bond at Texas A&M, just a lot of coaches in that range that are not afraid to send their kickers out. And then, like you said, there's also just the teams that are going to score a ton, right? SMU, LSU, USC, Ole Miss, Miami of Florida, Ohio State. Like, that's just me taking shots on teams that I know are going to potentially put up 40 points a game. And you're just going to have to take your shot on whether your kicker is going to be kicking 1 point or if he's kicking, 4 or 5 points. That's kind of the tough part about kickers, right? Is like if the offense is too good, they're just kicking extra points all day long. Right, nothing worse when you got a kicker on an offense that scored 40 points and they come away with 6 points. Meanwhile,
that's the hard part, right? Is you can't really, I think at the NFL it's a little easier to say like a really good offense, but like not like elite. But another thing that I noticed here is like how many of these teams are in the Big Ten? You get your elite kickers in the Big Ten, but most of these teams are SEC or indoors. So it's some Southern schools that are included because you want to avoid the bad weather.
Yep, exactly. So, all right, Kay, we did it. We got through the crash course. We weren't here for 2.5 hours like I promised. Yeah, we did it. Well done, sir. Appreciate you.
Yeah, I think you owe me one, but I don't know what yet. But
I said to do a CTN underdog stream, and you didn't like that. So
schedules are weird. I feel like I'm doing a new show every other day, but I was happy to do it. I like talking tight ends. I think it's a fun position this year. And then if I have to eat defenses and kickers to make that happen, I'll help you out. I know Ethan and Nate and some of those guys are too soft to tackle those topics.
Nah, again, we do kickers, we do defenses because people do play them, but the reality at the end of the day is there's only so much you can really do to predict it because there's simply like turnovers. You can ask anybody who sets odds and everything. You can't predict turnovers. That's just not something that they can ever really account for, let alone turnovers that then turn into touchdowns. And unfortunately for us in DSTs, that can make a major swing in the value of a DST. If anybody can DM me and tell me which DSTs will be scoring 6+ touchdowns this year, please go ahead and tell me, because I have no way to tell. With that being said, Kay, really appreciate you, man. What kind of stuff you got working on, or what kind of stuff do you got going on? I'm going to take a big nap after this show. I clearly need it today, man. What kind of stuff do you got working on?
Man, we're just tackling ball with my bestie, Ethan, and myself, and then just a lot of underdog content. It just doesn't stop. We got another month, and then I got to talk to Ethan with what we're doing with the podcast, but I'm sure we'll figure something out. I'm not.
I mean, we'll
probably do weekly DFS type stuff.
That's what I was wondering. Doesn't Underdog have like weekly contests and stuff like that, right?
They do, but we'll probably shift to more of like the DraftKings focused DFS rather than Underdog.
Okay, so
yeah, I got to talk to him about that. Ethan, if you're listening to this, DM me and let's get that conversation started.
There you go. Again, Kay and Ethan do a fantastic job with that show. I enjoy listening to them every single week, even when they do roast my drafts in the DFS chat on our Slack. But yeah, Kay does a great job. Go check out his stuff. In terms of us over here at Campus to Canton, we're really just chasing the natty. We got a lot of stuff going on Campus to Canton, but for us here at Chasing the Natty, this is the end of our Crash Course series. We are going to be off next week. I will be in Ohio for the annual Fantasy Football Expo. We will be doing the annual Kings Classic Draft over there, hosted by John Law, Matt Hicks over from Rookie Big Board. Ton of fun every single year, so be on the lookout for that next week. Or if Kay or Nate or Ethan or anybody want to take over CTN for a week and just talk about whatever the heck you want to talk about, I am totally fine with that as well. But we'll see how that goes throughout the week. Until then, really appreciate all of you guys. Season's right around the corner, man. We got fall camp stuff, and then week 0 is here faster than you guys can think. So until then, really appreciate you guys. Hope you guys have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.